UFC Fight Night, Magomed Ankalaev versus Johnny Walker 2. Welcome to a full card prediction and analysis video by yours truly here at Boxing MMA Picks, another UFC prediction and analysis video, first video of 2024. Nonetheless, same folks in the room. I go by Harris, he goes by Zan, and as usual, fight by fight breakdowns and analysis from that betting perspective. We want to let you know which fights are worth the money, which fights to avoid, which underdog has the best shot at winning, and some parlay action toward the end of the video as well. Make sure you hit the thumbs up on this video, first prediction video for 2024. Make sure you subscribe to the channel here at Boxing MMA Picks. And most importantly, we're going to want to hear from you in the comments when it's all said and done. For this first UFC event of the year, it is a UFC Fight Night. We have 12 fights overall taking place in the UFC Apex. 7 of those fights are going to be on our prelims. 5 of them are going to be on our main card. Let's get started right away with fight number 1 of our prelims. We're looking at Joshua Van versus Felipe Bunes. Good fight here. Bunes, 2-fight winning streak. He last competed 12 months ago, though he is making his UFC debut. Joshua Van, on the other hand, unanimous decision win over Kevin Borjas. That was back in November. And I think it's a good matchup to start us off here for this UFC Fight Night event. Joshua Van, the way that I see it, I mean, he has the UFC experience now at this point. He has that on his side. I think that is meaningful for this fight. Again, Bunes is making his debut. And we look at the odds here. Joshua Van at -260. Felipe Bunes at +210 definitely has some value as an underdog. I will say Joshua Van has the better boxing, but Bunes, very capable striker in his own right. As a kickboxer, he's actually introduced as a kickboxer as well as a jiu-jitsu style fighter. So, he can sort of carry his own with the striking. That said, I think stylistically, Joshua Van should be able to be that consistent fighter coming forward, should be able to be the better striker, all things considered. I think Joshua Van's patience worked really well for him in his last fight. The opponent that he was up against was a dynamic striker, again, in Kevin Borjas. But Van was more consistent. Van was more constant with that forward pressure, more constant with that activity. Now, I think Felipe Bunes probably is the better grappler here. And I think that's where his value is as an underdog. But I think Joshua Van, he's patient enough as a striker to not overcommit, to not really get caught by a bad takedown. And even if he is taken down, I think he has enough ground IQ from what I've seen to at least limit the damage, if nothing else. So my pick is going to be for Joshua Van. I think there's decent value on him here at -260. Really what it comes down to, I think his striking is too good in this situation. And I think that this fight mainly stays on the feet. So I'm going to go Joshua Van to start us off. First win of 2024.
Yeah, when you look at this fight, Felipe Bunes, his value is that grappling. If he can get this to the mat, he has a big advantage on the mat. But Joshua Van in his 2 fights in the UFC has shown the ability to keep it on the feet. Zalgis is a good litmus test to see where you're at. He looked really good in that fight. His fight after that, he was able to break down his opponent. He was able to show his cardio in that fight. So again, at 22 years old, it's only looking good for this guy. He's gonna have a big striking advantage, in my opinion. He throws combos. Bunes is kind of relying on single shots, and I think that's gonna hurt him in the striking exchanges. Bunes needs to get this to the mat. If he doesn't get it to the mat, I don't think he gets it done. I gotta go with Joshua Van in this spot. I think this is actually an easier fight. I know he's fighting the LFA champion, but I think as far as dangers go, I think this is an easier fight for him, and I think he should have this coverage. So I'm going to go Joshua Van here to get the win, to open the card.
All right, second fight of our prelims, Nikolas Motta versus Tom Nolan. Lightweight fight here. We've seen Nikolas Motta as a sizable underdog. He had a no contest versus Trey Ogden. That was back in November. Tom Nolan, on the other hand, undefeated. He's a UFC newcomer. He fought on Dana White Contender Series back in August. 2 strikers is what you can expect in this fight, so do not expect this fight to hit the mat. And I mean, really, this is anyone's fight. Though I'm not really sure who wins the fight, what I am sure is that I think Nolan is just way overpriced here. UFC debut, hasn't really done anything. Yes, he is undefeated, but I think minus 350 is just way too steep for any UFC newcomer, especially taking on a Nikolas Motta, who is capable as a striker. I think this is going to be a firefight. I think this fight can really be about who lands on who first. I can see why Motta is coming in as an underdog here, despite being a dangerous striker. He had a pretty lackluster performance in his last fight, despite that premature stoppage leading to a no contest. He didn't look good, right? He was taken down 3 times. He was outstruck 58-14. Mota's patient style of striking, I think it gives opponents maybe too much time to set up their offense. The way that I look at this fight, Tom Nolan, much better striker than someone like a Trey Ogden. So you got to imagine that Nolan could and maybe should be effective with the striking exchanges in this fight. But my pick is actually going to be for Nikolas Motta, mainly not because I necessarily think he's the better fighter, but mainly because I think his value is just way too good here as an underdog at plus 270. Nolan, yes, he's looked good, but he hasn't faced a high level of competition. He's making his debut in the UFC, as I mentioned, and a lot of times, UFC fighters make their debut and they don't look good. It's that second fight that they look better in. The way that I see this fight analytically as well, I think Motta has the ability to work his way in to land that fight-changing punch on Nolan. Ultimately, anything can happen. I think either fighter can hurt the other. Both of these guys are dangerous. But with that said, based on value, if nothing else, I got to go Nikolas Motta from a prediction perspective as well.
Yeah, this is a good fight, a real test for a real test for Tom Nolan, because this is definitely a big step up. He's 6-0. But as he's an Australian fighter, and these guys I find are they're good or they're bad. There's no real in between. And I actually think Tom Nolan has the potential to be a good fighter. I remember him on the Contender Series against Bogdan Grad. Bogdan Grad was coming in with some credentials, with some guys on his record, and he lit him up, man, knocked him right out, finished the fight, impressed me. 6'3". Motta has a iffy chin. He can't really take the shots anymore, and he's been finished a couple times, like 3, 4 times. He's been finished in his losses. I think Tom Nolan, with that reach, is going to be a big advantage that he's going to utilize. And Motta is not active enough for me to like his style in this fight. He's going to be at range, hesitant with his shots, patient with his striking. And I think Nolan, with that reach, is going to be able to dictate where the fight goes and eventually catch him. I'm going to go Tom Nolan. He's 23. He's only getting better. Just like Joshua Van in the previous fight, who's 22, you got to expect big improvements fight to fight when they're this young. Remember John Jones, right? So these guys are this young. These guys really pick up on things and they improve fight to fight, and it's noticeable. So I expect both of these guys to be better. This come around, this big layoff. I'm gonna go with the newcomer here to come into the UFC, put on his show. I think he gets it done. I think the UFC is giving him a guy that he can beat. I like Tom Nolan in this one.
Fight number 3 of our prelims, Westin Wilson versus Gene Silva. Gene Silva, UFC debut for him. He fought on Dana White Contender Series back in September. Westin Wilson, on the other hand, lost to Joe Anderson Brito in his July debut. And I don't want to spend too much time here because just like in the last fight, we're seeing the UFC newcomer coming in as a favorite, except for this fight, Gene Silva coming in as a huge favorite, minus 1100. Right away, that's going to tell me this fight is not worth betting on whatsoever. Again, same narrative. UFC newcomer, despite how good you feel about him, you just can't put that as a guarantee. Again, I think this fight is set up for Gene Silva to win, but I don't think it's a guaranteed spot for him. Both guys do prefer the striking. Westin Wilson as that sort of longer striker. He's going to have the height advantage. He's going to have the reach advantage in this one as well. Whereas Gene Silva, he trains with Caio Borralho, so kind of has that similar style of dynamic striking. I think that Silva also should be able to be the aggressor, whereas Wilson, like I mentioned, will be fighting from range. Westin Wilson in his last fight, he showed me that probably doesn't have the best chin. And I think that's going to be, or I think that is a big part of what makes Gene Silva such a big favorite in this fight, especially as a dangerous striker. I do think Silva also should be the better striker. But again, in general, I don't really see him as an elite level fighter by any means. I do think Gene Silva wins fairly comfortably here. So to the point of him being 11 minus 1100, I think he wins pretty comfortably because he's flat out the better fighter, in my opinion, than Westin Wilson. I think he has better striking than Westin Wilson. I think he's probably better overall. I think he's more dangerous. I think he's more aggressive. But again, I'm just going to caution, be careful with assuming to throw this on all of your parlays, only because, again, Silva hasn't necessarily proven anything. Again, Silva should get it done comfortably, but I would be hesitant from a betting perspective on this one.
Yeah, this fight, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, when I look at Westin Wilson, man, he shouldn't be here, right? And he's gonna have to get this fight to the mat. That's his best way. That's his avenue to win this fight. Somehow get grappling, get clinching going, get a submission. He has decent grappling, and he could definitely get a submission in this fight. But I don't see this guy giving Gene Silva problems. Westin does not have good takedowns. Gene Silva is decent avoiding takedowns. He can keep it on the feet. Striking wise, he's gonna hurt this guy, Westin. He's gonna hurt him real bad. And I see Gene Silva finishing this guy in the first round. The thing about Gene Silva that I like, he's shown on the Contender Series, he can go 3 rounds. He was an underdog in that fight, and he won the full 3 rounds, but it wasn't close, right? And he looked really good. So I think in this fight, I know he can go to the 3 rounds. He's going to be the much better striker, the more dangerous guy. He's going to be able to keep it on the feet. He's Brazilian, so he does have some grappling there. I think he gets it done pretty easily here. I don't think Westin belongs. So I'm going to go Gene Silva to get a finish in this fight.
Fight number 4, we have an exciting bantamweight fight for Farid Basharat versus Taylor Lapilus. Basharat beat Cledson Rodriguez. That was back in September. He remains undefeated at 11-0. Taylor Lapilus, on the other hand, unanimous decision win over Kylan Lauren. That was back in September as well. That was actually on the same card. And Lapilus is on a 6-fight winning streak in his own right. High level fight here. I'll say that. I know these bantamweights are not ranked, but it just shows the depth in the division, shows the talent level in the division. I think these are 2 really talented fighters. I think both of these guys are really good strikers for sure. Lapilus, we know, very methodical with his striking style, really great counter striker. Basharat, good counter striker in his own right, has a really good jab, has a really good activity as well. From a prediction perspective, I think the story for this fight is going to be in the statistics. Basharat, slightly higher pace in terms of the significant strikes landed per minute. Basharat lands more takedowns at 3.5 per versus half a takedown for Taylor Lapilus. I think Basharat just simply has more ways to win this fight. I think the higher pace is going to work in his favor. I think his ability to land takedowns is going to work in his favor as well. And for as good as as good of a striker as Taylor Lapilus is, again, he's more of a counter striker. He's more of the type of fighter that's going to rely on you as the opponent making errors. Basharat, like I said, high level, high IQ, good counter striker in his own right. I don't really see him having issues handling that type of style. Doesn't mean he's going to run away with the fight by any means. I think this can be a competitive fight, but I like the value on Basharat again, just because he has more ways to win the fight in terms of the striking exchanges. I think his pace can work to his advantage. And then in terms of the ground game, I think he just has, more of the capability of landing the takedowns. So more ways to win the fight. I like Farid Basharat to get it done. I think he remains undefeated.
Yeah, for me, this is a tougher fight for me because I'm high on Farid, and with Taylor Lapilus, I'm definitely I respect his skills, and in this fight, I think Taylor Lapilus could be the better striker. And coming into this fight, if he has a game plan where he's working with a lot of wrestlers and he's able to keep it on the feet, the fight can get real sticky for Farid Basharat. Taylor Lapilus is a vet. I was leaning Lapilus because I do think when it comes to the striking, he has an edge there. But when I look at the overall game, I got to go Farid because he does have the grappling that if he gets on top, you can probably hold him down there the whole round or even get a finish in that scenario. On the feet, he's not bad. He's good. I'm not saying Lapilus is a far better striker. I just think that Lapilus might edge him in the striking. Farid Basharat is a really skilled striker, mixes it up really well. Again, the takedowns I think are going to be important in this fight. So I'm going to go with Farid Basharat for the channel as far as making a pick here. More well-rounded guy in this fight. He seems high level. I'm definitely behind him and his brother. So I think this is a fight he could win. But again, I do think Lapilus has value. I think there is a world where Lapilus comes out, shows out, keeps it on the feet, outstrikes him. But I'm going to go with Farid Basharat. I just think the younger guy, he likely could come to this fight as a better fighter, mixing the grappling and even the striking. I expect him to give Lapilus problems in the striking as well. So I'm going to go with Farid, just having the wider game. But again, I think this is a tough fight, and I'm probably not going to bet this fight.
All right, let's talk fight number 5 of our prelims. Marcus McGhee versus Gaston Bolaños. Now, this is a fight that was originally scheduled for August when McGhee took on his last opponent, JP Buys, but Bolaños did withdraw in that one. Nonetheless, we're here today. McGhee 4-fight winning streak after beating JP Buys, as I mentioned. Bolaños beat Aaron Phillips back in April. Now, this fight's really interesting because both of these guys have pretty similar skill sets in some ways, right? Like Marcus McGhee, 100% finish rate. I think 7 of those 8 wins via KO TKO. Gaston Bolaños, 6 of his 7 wins via KO TKO. Both of these guys are good strikers. Both of these guys sort of implement a bit of a switch stance type of game. Both of these guys are patient strikers as well. And again, they're dangerous. The power is absolutely there. Honestly, it's anyone's fight. I think both guys look good. McGhee is actually going to be my pick for this fight, though. I think, my gut tells me to feel good about it, but I would be careful from that betting perspective. I think for McGhee, probably more committed to that forward pressure. I've seen Gaston Bolaños kind of take the pressure off, especially when fighters implement that pressure on him. Again, trying to rely on that IQ instead, that outside fighting instead. And I think that sort of commitment to forward pressure is going to work well for Marcus McGhee. I also think that Marcus McGhee has the better ground game if needed. I think it's going to be closer than the odds indicate, though. I think that McGhee has looked good, great momentum. You kind of want to go with him no matter what. But like I said, I would be careful with this one. Gaston Bolaños, very capable, similar sized opponents, similar style of opponent as well. And both of these guys are just as dangerous as one another as with respect to the striking. But I got to go Marcus McGhee. He's got some momentum going in his direction with the 4-fight winning streak that he is on. And again, I think that forward pressure is going to work to his advantage. So I'm going to go with Marcus McGhee, but beware, this one is pretty close.
Yeah, for me, Gaston Bolaños, he's a kickboxer, so I definitely feel if this stays on the feet, it could work. It could work to help him out. He can definitely find a finish. He can definitely hurt McGhee if this stays standing. He has that tricky spinning back elbow that he seems to land on a lot of his opponents, and a lot of the times it leads to a finish. So as far as the striking goes, as good as McGhee is, McGhee's my guy, man. As good as he is, I think Bolaños with that technical, with the background, I think if it stays on the feet, he's gonna have an advantage where he can definitely throw those kicks, use the distance, counter, and look good in those exchanges. I think the difference in this fight is Marcus has good boxing, he has decent striking, but I think Gaston has the better striking. But the grappling, Marcus has far better grappling than Gaston Bolaños. I think he needs to use it here. If he doesn't use it, I see a really close fight that can go either way. Because as good as Bolaños is, Marcus McGhee is a rough guy, man. He's a dog. He hits hard. Sometimes, man, like you could be the best guy, but one shot just changes the fight, and Marcus can do that. I'm gonna go with Marcus McGhee, just having the more diverse game here, just having that ground game. I think that's gonna be a big advantage for him. He's a strong guy, but if he falls in love with his striking, I think it could be a problem for him. But I think he has a good team around him. He trains with Kyler Phillips and those guys over there. So he does have some good training partners. He should have a game plan. They know he's fighting a guy that came into MMA as a kickboxer. They know the best way to win this is to get this to the mat. So I'm going to go with McGhee. I just think his team's going to have a game plan to utilize that grappling.
Fight number 6 of our prelims, Matthew Semelsberger versus Preston Parsons welterweight fight here. This is one of those fights that you can kind of make a case for either fighter. Matthew Semelsberger lost to Uros Medic back in July. He's actually on a two-fight losing streak, whereas Preston Parsons had that split decision loss to Trevin Giles back in March. And again, like I said, it's one of those fights where you can make a case for either fighter, mainly because you can't really trust either of these guys. They do have similar skill sets on paper. They have that ground game going for them, but they also have decent striking to pair along with that. I would say that Parsons has the better wrestling, at least more intentional with his takedowns. On top of that, Matthew Semelsberger only has 50% takedown defense. So I see Parsons kind of having the advantage in terms of the ground game, in terms of at least intention behind that ground game offensively. Now, in terms of the striking, I would say that Semelsberger probably has the edge, but I can't definitively say that. I think these guys, for the most part, are kind of like the same level of striker. What I do think works in Matthew Semelsberger's favor is that he's not afraid to engage. You know, he likes to keep that forward pressure, likes to keep that pace on his opponents. I think that can wear on Preston Parsons as a fighter who could potentially slow down. It's a close fight. I mean, Vegas knows that. It's reflected in the odds. And it's a fight that I'm kind of going back and forth on. I think that Parsons is a solid pick from a value perspective because he can wrestle for 3 rounds. And again, he is just as capable as Matthew Semelsberger as a striker. But again, going back and forth on this one, I'm actually going to end up going with Matthew Semelsberger. Preston Parsons, although he has 3 rounds of wrestling in him, he definitely slows down. I think Semelsberger can capitalize on that, kind of get excited, kind of jump on those moments. Parsons can also give up top control, like we saw in his last fight, alluding to him getting tired. And I believe that Semelsberger just has a bit more of that dog in him. I'm looking at this fight as a split decision type of fight, but my pick will be for Matthew Semelsberger.
Yeah, I think this is one of those fights can literally go either way. Semelsberger can land the bomb. Preston could use that grappling and dictate the fight round 1 to round 3. I'm going to go with Preston Parson in a fight that I think is a coin flip because I can't really trust these guys, especially based on their last performances. But when I look at skill for skill, Matthew, I think, has the better striking, the more dangerous guy, especially the danger is the thing. He has a lot of power for that division. He knocks down, he hurts a lot of fighters in these fights when he lands. So that's a big thing on the Matthew side. But I just feel if Preston can kind of dictate the pace from the early going, get some takedowns, kind of drain on that cardio of Matthew Semelsberger, there is a way Preston Parsons can win the fight. So in a fight that I really think can go either way, I'm going to lean on Preston Parsons, grappling approach, going 3 rounds. And I think he can get it done. But again, this is a fight that I really feel can go either way. I'm not betting this fight for sure. And I wouldn't suggest betting this fight. But for the channel, I'm going to go Preston Parsons here. I think he's an underdog. So I'm going to go with him to get this done.
He is an underdog, and let's move on to our final fight of the prelims: Andrei Arlovski versus Waldo Cortes-Acosta. Arlovski 2-fight losing streak. He lost to Dontel Mays back in June. Cortes-Acosta beat Lucas Brzeski back in August. And let me actually keep this one really short, given that Waldo Cortes-Acosta is a -800 favorite. I don't really see a path for Andrei Arlovski in this fight. This fight, I think, is going to stay on the feet. Arlovski, we know, has decent MMA boxing, but Cortes-Acosta should be too good of a striker, coming in as a kickboxer for Arlovski to handle at this point in his career. We've seen Arlovski still be able to get wins at this level, but it's against heavyweights who just don't have that skill set, right? Don't have good striking, don't have one particular thing that they're good at. Heavyweights that are just lower level fighters in general. Arlovski's proven that he can still beat those guys. But someone like a Cortes-Acosta should be able to get, should give Arlovski too many problems here. Too quick, too dynamic, too high level of a striker. Plus, like we've seen in Cortes-Acosta's wins in the UFC, it works to his benefit when his opponent is not trying to land takedowns. I do not anticipate Arlovski attempting them. I do not anticipate Arlovski landing takedowns. Plus, we got to factor in the age, 32 years old versus 44 years old. Though it is a heavyweight beware, so anything can happen in a heavyweight fight. I don't care who is facing who. In general, I do feel pretty good about picking Waldo Cortes-Acosta in this spot to get it done, possibly even get that finish in the first or second round. So Cortes-Acosta, I feel pretty good about it, but again, heavyweight beware, be careful on parlays.
Okay. Yeah. So this is definitely a fight. Arlovski needs to utilize those kicks, and he needs to move around the cage. If he can last 3 rounds, he can outstrike these guys. But just using his movement, leg kicks, the odd 1-2, the odd counter, and a little bit of loving from the judges, he can win these fights. But I actually like Acosta in this fight here. I think he's gonna have too much here in this fight. The power, the chin, I can't trust Arlovski. I think it's just a matter of time. Once he lands a good shot, I think Arlovski's gonna look for a way out. So I'm gonna go with Waldo to get this done, and I think he gets the finish at some point in this fight.
All right, let's move on to our main card where we have 5 fights overall. Fight number 1 of the main card, good middleweight scrap here, Phil Hawes versus Bruno Ferreira. For Phil Hawes, 2-fight losing streak. He lost to Ikram Aliskerov back in May. Bruno Ferreira lost to Nursultan Ruziboev back in July. Tricky fight for sure. I mean, from a betting perspective, we know it's close. From a prediction perspective, really hard to feel strongly in any one way or the other. Fajeda made a lot of noise, of course, in his debut when he knocked out Gregory Rodriguez. But we saw him get knocked out in his last fight. So just 1-1 in the UFC, hasn't really done anything in the UFC, hasn't really proven anything in terms of his actual skill level. What he has proven, of course, is that his power translates to this level of competition. But again, from a skill perspective, we don't know how good Bruno Ferreira really is, right? Phil Hawes fights are always hard to predict because there's a lot to like about him on paper. The striking is there, the wrestling is there. We see the takedown numbers. He just can't really put it together in the UFC for whatever reason. 4-3 in the UFC. And let me not say for whatever reason, because with Phil Hawes, the biggest red flag is his chin, right? 5 losses, 4 of them via KO, TKO. We know that Bruno Ferreira has big power as a dangerous striker. And I think that's why we see Bruno Ferreira as the slight favorite in this fight. But I gotta give Phil Hawes maybe one more chance. I gotta give him the nod, prediction wise, despite the huge risk. I mean, the moment Bruno Ferreira lands on him, Phil Hawes could be done. But Hawes has UFC experience on his side. Hawes has wrestling on his side. Hawes may even be the better striker, all things considered. I think if it wasn't for the chin, Hawes would probably be like a minus 200 as an example, right? So a Fajeda KO wouldn't surprise me at all. It's probably what you should expect in this fight. But Phil Hawes is going to be my pick. I think there's some value on him. I think Bruno Fajeda is still very unproven. And Phil Hawes, I think, has the advantage on paper in this fight. So minus the chin, I'm going to hope he keeps that protected. I think Phil Hawes can get it done.
Yeah, Bruno Ferreira, that guy's just a brawler, right? He's just looking to land a heavy wild hook, and he has power. He's putting guys away with that power. But his technique is not there. And when you look at Phil Hawes versus Ferreira, Phil Hawes on paper is the far better fighter, better grappler, the better boxer, the better kickboxer. So when you go skill for skill, Phil Hawes has them beat almost everywhere. So I'm gonna lean towards Phil Hawes as well. Again, we know the chin is an issue. He could take that shot. Like he was looking good against Chris Curtis, looking really good. I thought it was gonna be an easy win. I picked Phil Hawes that day, and then one shot, the fight just turned, and he was winning the whole fight up until that point. And Chris Curtis is a decent striker, and I'd have to say Ferreira doesn't have the skills, man, and skills pay the bills. So I'm gonna go with Phil Hawes here to utilize the better skill set that he has, avoiding that power. If he avoids the power, I think he can hurt. I think he's going to win this fight. Not only that, Phil Hawes has power himself, and he can definitely hurt Ferreira, who was knocked out or who was finished in his last fight. So I'm going to go with Phil Hawes here to get this done. Confidence, no, because again, he's very fragile, but he's just a far better fighter that I got to roll with him being the underdog as well. If he avoids that big shot, he should be able to get this done.
Second fight of our main card, Ricky Simón versus Mario Bautista. Really exciting bantamweight fight here. Simón lost to Yadong Song back in April, whereas Bautista, he's looking good lately, right? 5-fight winning streak. He beat Damon Blackshear back in August. I like this fight a lot. Two of my favorite fighters in the division, two guys that have that dog in them, two guys that are going to fight for your money. Two guys with high level, well-rounded skill sets, right? I mean, I think we saw a chink in the armor of Ricky Simón in his last fight, granted a very high level opponent in Yadong Song, and that was a round main event. We saw a Simón that was a lot more hesitant with what normally is forward pressure coming out of him. We saw a Simón that didn't really have a response to the complete game of Song Yadong. What makes this fight interesting is that Mario Bautista, at least on paper, at least in theory, he has that completeness to his game. Very much like a Yadong Song in some ways. Now, of course, much higher level of competition for Batista. I'm not comparing him to Yadong Song, but again, from a skill set perspective, he's one of those fighters that can do a bit of everything. He has the striking, he has the wrestling as well. I think this is anyone's fight. I think that Bautista is capable of potentially emulating what Yadong Song was able to do in Ricky Simon's last fight. I also think that Simón learned a lot of valuable lessons from that fight and will adjust. So really hard to call this one in either direction. I mean, Ricky Simón, of course, is supposed to win. He's the favorite. He's the higher ranked fighter. It's Mario Bautista coming up in level of competition for this one. And Simón can show him that he's just not at that level yet, right? But my prediction is actually going to be for Mario Bautista. I'm going on a bit of a limb here. I'm taking a bit of a risk on this one. Again, I think he has that complete sort of Yadong Song type of skill set that evidently gives Ricky Simón problems, right? So that's a style that has better striking than Simón. That's a style that has that sort of dominant come forward style as well. And that's a fighter with the ground IQ to at least fight off those takedowns or at least limit Ricky Simon's effectiveness with his wrestling, which is Simon's strength. So again, big step up in competition for Bautista. Is he ready for the challenge? I don't know, but I'm gonna sort of roll the dice and sort of bet that he is. So I'm gonna go with the underdog, Mario Bautista. But again, a Ricky Simón win would not surprise me. But I will go with the underdog, Mario Bautista.
Yeah, I'm really high on Mario Bautista. He's definitely showing he's one of those guys that take this game very serious. He came into the game with that striking, and then lately he's been using that grappling. It shows that he's in the gym. He's definitely trying to better his craft. And he was able to wrestle a lot of these guys, and that just shows to me the improvements he's making between these fights. And this is a far different fight. You can't use any of that wrestling in this fight. I think on the feet, I think Batista, I think the flying knee is something he should look for in this fight. I think that's gonna be a big thing for him. But ultimately, I just don't think he gets it done. I think Ricky Simón, I think the grappling's gonna be too much. The wrestling, the pace, the strength when he gets on top. Remember, Mary Batista had issues with the Mon Blackshear in the wrestling department, and Ricky Simón is a different beast. And Ricky Simón, this is a 3-round fight. Ricky Simón can go this 3 rounds at a really high pace. As good as Batista is, I just think the pace is going to be too much. The takedown is going to be too much. The strength. I'm going to go with Ricky Simón here. I think he gets it done. But again, Mario Batista, man, that striking that we saw earlier in his career, the flying knees, like those strikes, the high kicks, the low kicks, he can bring that into this fight. He's going to need to because the wrestling's not going to work. And he could definitely land a shot that can end the fight. Some type of flying. I'm seeing a flying knee. I think that's how he gets this fight done. But I got to go with Ricky Simón, who I think has more avenues here. And I think it's going to be a situation where he's just too much experience, too much pace, too much wrestling. I go Ricky Simón here to get the win.
Third fight of our main card, Jim Miller versus Gabriel Benítez, lightweight fight here. Jim Miller beat Jesse Butler back in June. Gabriel Benítez, 17 months since his last fight. He beat Charlie Ontiveros back in August 2022. Now, this fight was originally scheduled for February 2023. Here we are nearly 1 year later. It's finally taking place. Benítez a bit of a one-dimensional fighter, right? I think Jim Miller has a sizable advantage with the ground game. in this fight. I think Miller can land takedowns against Benitez's 58% takedown defense. And I can't really confidently say that Benitez is a better striker necessarily, though I do think that they can both be effective with their striking. I think it's a close fight, all things considered. I mean, Jim Miller, 40 years old, Benitez, 35 years old. Both of these guys have double-digit losses, so you always got to be careful with a fight like that. But I think stylistically, I kind of like how Jim Miller matches up in this fight. I think his striking will hold. I think he's not outclassed on the feet by any means. And then again, I think that the ground game is going to work in his favor. And on top of that, Gabriel Benitez just doesn't really have that extra gear in him, especially when he's facing pressure from an opponent. And I think that Jim Miller will be able to capitalize on that. So I'm going to pick Jim Miller. I do feel pretty comfortable in that pick, but I absolutely am not betting on this. Two fighters with double-digit losses, I would stay away from a betting perspective.
Yeah, for sure. These type of guys, you can't really trust these guys, right? Like, especially at this point in their career. This could be the fight that they fall off. Both guys over 35, 35 and 40. Benitez, though, he has that striking advantage in this fight. The kicks, that's gonna be a big thing. But Jim Miller, he's definitely even at this age, he's improving. In the striking, he should be able to hold his own. Maybe I can see him having issues with the speed from Benitez, but as the fight gets into closer distances, Jim Miller's gonna have success there. But the grappling, I could see Miller losing the whole fight, and then once he gets it to the mat, the fight just changes, and then either he finishes him or the takedowns become very easy after that point, draining out Benitez. So I like Jim Miller here. I just think that this type of fight, the only danger he has to worry about is the leg kicks, really. And I just see as the fight goes on, I see Miller getting a takedown, getting this to the mat, and the fight just really turning at that point. So I can see him losing. And then once the grappling goes, the fight's going to completely change. It's a 3-round fight. I think Jim Miller here gets it done.
Next up, we have fight number 4 and the co-main event of the evening, Matheus Nicolau versus Manel Kape. Now, this is actually a rematch of a fight that they had way back in March 2021. Nicolau got the split decision win at that time, although nearly all media scores pointed toward Manel Kape as being the true winner of that fight. Nicolau 3-1 since then. Manel Kape has been 4-0 since then. So I definitely love the timing here for this rematch. Nicolau, as I mentioned, 3-1. He lost to Brandon Royval back in April, whereas Manel Kape has kept his winning streak going when he beat Felipe dos Santos back in September. For the most part, I feel the same. I mean, I won't make this prediction too long, but for the most part, I feel the same about this fight today as I felt 3 years ago. So I think if you watch that fight 3 years ago, I think it could still be a good barometer for how this fight would go. I think this fight stays on the feet for the most part, just like the last fight. I think that I still think Manel Kape will be the slightly faster striker, faster movement on the feet. I think he's going to be more dynamic. Except now, I think Manel Kape probably is the crisper striker as well. Whereas I thought Nicolau kind of held that crown going into their last fight. I think Nicolau's last fight was also something to keep in mind. A little bit of recency bias, of course. Royval, very dynamic. Royval ended up knocking him out. Manel Kape, we know, is just as dynamic. Manel Kape can definitely catch Matheus Nicolau this time around. And again, I think Manel Kape won their first fight that they had. So even if that fight goes the exact same way, I can see Manel Kape as being the fighter that should get his hand raised at the end of it. I still think it'll be a competitive fight. I still think some of the strengths that Nicolau showed in that fight in terms of being able, being more likely to land a takedown, I think that could still work in his favor. But I think from a odds perspective, I think Vegas got it right here. I think Manel Kape should get it done. Most of the fight stays on the feet. He should be the better striker, more dynamic, faster, except this time around, he probably knocks Matheus Nicolau out the way that Brandon Royval was able to, right? So, and if not, he probably wins on points instead. So I'm going to go Manel Kape to get it done in this spot in the rematch.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. I think Manel Kape's out for revenge here. I think from their first fight, I see more improvements on the Manel Kape side. He's a lot quicker. His striking is sharper, and his grappling, he's definitely shown improvements in grappling, using grappling to get back to the better position. He wasn't doing that early on in his career, and I just feel like right now, I think that between the two, he's made the more improvements. The first fight was pretty close. I think with the improvements, I definitely see White Calf is favored here as well. So I'm going to go Manel Cop here. Too quick. I think he's going to be too fast. I think he's going to hurt him on the feet. And I see a lot of big shots coming from Manel Cop. Even if Nicolau's landing shots, winning the round, I see like a Marlon Vera type thing where Manel lands a really big shot, steals the round. But I definitely think the power could be a problem, and at some point, I wouldn't be surprised Manel Cop gets a finisher. So I'm going to go Manel Cop here to get the win.
All right, let's move on to our main event of the evening, Magomed Ankalaev versus Johnny Walker. Now, of course, this is a rematch. Their first fight was in October. That fight was ruled a no contest because of that, of course, quote unquote, accidental illegal knee. Neither guy has fought since then. So really look no further than that last fight, right? I think taking a look at how that last fight was going before that no contest is enough for me to make a prediction in this one. I think that's a fight where Ankalaev, he looked like he was in control of the striking for the most part. Now, Walker, I don't think is as good of a striker as Ankalaev is. One thing that Walker is good at, though, is those kicks and, using his kicks, using his height, using his length. And Ankalaev, for whatever reason, has a problem with those leg kicks. We saw what happened in the Jan Blachowicz fight. And there were moments where Johnny Walker was touching those leg kicks as well. But again, for the most part, Ankalaev looked in control of the striking. Ankalaev was able to hurt Johnny Walker and kind of get a takedown as a result of hurting him. But it was still early in the fight, right? It was still early in the fight. It was a bad doctor stoppage after that illegal knee. So we don't really know exactly how the fight would have played out. But I think that Ankalaev is a pretty safe pick here. He's minus 550. He's a big favorite for a reason. He should be better everywhere in this fight, should have the much better striking, should be the better wrestler who's more likely to land takedowns, especially against Johnny Walker's 57% takedown defense. I don't think Johnny Walker is going to have the answers for Magomed Ankalaev throughout this fight. And I think that Ankalaev, again, just as tough as they come, so I don't think any kind of big shot from Johnny Walker would end the fight right away, right? I think it's very unlikely that that happens. So I think Magomed Ankalaev is good in this spot, should be good in the rematch. If he didn't throw that knee, if the doctor didn't stop the fight, this is a fight where, it wouldn't really be worth a rematch, in my opinion. So I like Magomed Ankalaev to get it done here. I don't think he'll have a problem. I think he'll show why he's a big favorite.
Yeah, watching the first fight, it's clear as day. Magomed is the better fighter. But if old Johnny comes back, all right, and old Johnny lands one of those big shots, could definitely put out anyone, right? At this, especially in this division. Light heavyweight, these are some big guys, man. These guys land some big shots as well. So I wouldn't put it past Johnny Walker landing a Hail Mary, winning this fight. He was able to kind of feel out Ankalaev in the first fight. So he might have took something. And I wouldn't put it past Johnny Walker getting some type of upset win in the rematch. But based on what I've seen in the first fight, it's clear to me that Ankalaev is a better fighter. The grappling should be his approach in this fight. So I think he's gonna get it done, man. I just got to go with the guy that is the better guy, more tools. First fight, he was on his way to win the fight. It seemed like looked like Johnny Walker was looking for a way out. So that alone has me leaning towards Ankalaev, man, because Johnny Walker had a way out and he took it, and Ankalaev was ready to go. So I got to go with Ankalaev, the better guy, and I think he has more heart. Obviously, I think he gets the win in this fight.
All right, let's take it to Vegas. Let's take a look at some underdog action. Let's take a look at some favorite action as well. Of course, I'll start by reading out the underdog. So Felipe Bunes is an underdog versus Joshua Van. Preston Parsons is an underdog. Andrei Arlovski, Taylor Lapilus, Gabriel Benítez versus Jim Miller, Gaston Bolaños, Matheus Nicolau, Nicolas Motta, Phil Hawes, Mario Bautista, Westin Wilson, and Johnny Walker.
All right, let me go with I like Phil Hawes.
Phil Hawes, I will echo that sentiment. That is also my underdog pick. So I think Phil Hawes definitely has good value minus the chin, but should be the better fighter on paper. And in terms of parlay action, favorite picks, who are you looking at stringing together?
All right, so favorite picks, I like Joshua Van, I like Gene Silva, and I like Tom Nolan. I think the first three fights, I think those favorites win.
All right, so those three fights, Joshua Van, Gene Silva, Tom Nolan, those three fights would be a 2.11. That means that a $100 bet will have a total return of 211. For our bigger bettors, a $250 bet will have a total return of 528. Now, in terms of my picks, we have one pick that is similar, and that is Joshua Van. Otherwise, kind of taking some risk, but also feeling good about each fighter in these respective spots. I like Farid Basharat in that spot, despite the respect given to Taylor Lapilus. And again, I like Magomed Ankalaev despite the danger that Johnny Walker can possess. So going straight to the main event for that one. Those three fights would be a 2.4. That means that $100 will return a total of 240. And for our bigger bettors, $250 will return a total of 601. So let's sign off on that note. This has been UFC Fight Night, Magomed Ankalaev versus Johnny Walker 2. Full card prediction video presented by yours truly here at Boxing MMA Picks. Make sure you hit the thumbs up on this video. It is our first video for 2024. We're definitely excited to make you guys money this year. Make sure you subscribe to the channel here at Boxing MMA Picks, and most importantly, want to hear from you in the comments. How do you feel about our picks? How do you feel about our underdogs? How do you feel about our parlays? What fights are you looking at? What props are you looking at? Let that all be known in the comments, and we're more than happy to have that conversation with you. Otherwise, let's officially sign off. UFC Fight Night, Magomed Ankalaev versus Johnny Walker 2. Full card prediction presented by yours truly here at Boxing MMA Picks. He goes by Zan, I go by Harris in our usual fashion. Let's get this money.
Let's get it.